Hello and welcome back to ASPN, your go-to for all things parasports. Last time we were able to review just what exactly the Paralympics are and get a little bit into our perception of what athletes represent to us and the competitive sports world. I'm joined here again with Joe Derridita.
Thank you, Austin. So excited to be back. It was great to dive headfirst into the background and overall nature of the Paralympic Games last time. I couldn't be more thrilled to learn more about the specific sporting events and classifications that these games are organized around.
Glad to have you here. Let's jump right back into it then. The International Paralympic Committee, or IPC, has established 10 disability categories, including physical, visual, and intellectual disabilities, under which participating athletes may compete. These categories are applied to both summer and winter games and are further broken down into distinct classifications, which relate to the specific nature of an athlete's disability.
Yeah, that's right, Austin. So to provide a pretty non-specific example, a blind athlete may compete against other blind athletes in an event, and then this event is split into categories based on the level of visual impairment of the competing athletes. Basically, athletes are grouped together by disability type and specific functionality. So every sport's classifications are unique and are tailored to promote fair and competitive competition.
Right. So months before athletes even compete, however, they must go through a precise classifying process in which a three-step system will decide their classification. First and foremost, athletes are evaluated to determine if they have a disability that is recognized under those 10 categories we discussed earlier. This step is of utmost importance to ensure the integrity of the games, as well as certify that all athletes abide by the standards put in place by the IPC.
Yeah, and within the Paralympic Games, some sports offer classifications for many disabilities, while others are solely based on one. For example, sporting events such as track or field or swimming provide many classes, while sports such as goalball provide events solely for the visually impaired athletes.
The second part of the classification is based on what is called the minimum disability criteria. In other words, within each sport in the Paralympic Games, classification guidelines must specify the functionality associated with the disability and what that must be for an athlete to be considered eligible.
Exactly, that's right, Austin. And that criteria may include maximum height for short stature, or even a level of amputation for athletes with limb deficiencies. This criteria is sport-specific, and as a legitimate sports rule, some athletes may be cleared for one sporting event, while not others, based on this minimum disability criteria.
In the last step of the classification process, the actual sports classes. When an athlete is eligible for a sport, the classification panel will then assess which sport class the athlete will be competing in. These sport classes group together Paralympic athletes with similar functionality for equitable competition. This means that athletes with different disabilities, but with similar levels of function, can compete against one another as well, as long as it is equitable competition seen in sports such as wheelchair racing.
And sports classes can be very confusing for the ordinary viewer without any detailed knowledge, because, for example, sports such as para-ice hockey or para-powerlifting have only one sport class with different distinctions. On the other hand, para-athletics contains all different disciplines, such as running, jumping, or even throwing events, as well as athletes of all 10 eligible impairments, containing 52 sports classes.
That's right. And the other thing that's really interesting is that not all sports classes can be applied to all sports. So while you may classify for one sport in one classification, that classification might not be applied to another sport. It's really awesome to hear that the Paralympics offer not only such a diverse range of sporting events, but also so many classes within each sporting event as well to fully include and promote these incredible athletes.
I couldn't agree more. It's truly incredible to see such different athletes competing at the highest level of competition throughout these sporting events and within each class. Let's take a closer look at some of the individual sports to further our understanding on both the rules and sports classes found within each one.
I like that idea. Let's begin with swimming, one of the Paralympic sport categories with the highest participation as well as the widest range of disabilities participating. Swimming events are distinguished from one another based on 1, style, and 2, distance, as well as disability, these being physical, intellectual, and visual. These disabilities are represented by a numeric system. 1 through 10 represents physical disabilities, 11 through 13 visual, and 14 intellectual. As a general rule of thumb, the higher the number within the range, the greater functionality.
Yeah, and also within that numeric system, Paralympic swimming is divided based on the event as well, with a letter abbreviation placed before the number. For example, the letter S represents freestyle, butterfly, or backstroke events. The letters SB represents breaststroke events, and the letters SM represent individual medley. Furthermore, a swimmer classified as S2 may be a double amputee freestyle swimmer, while a swimmer classified as SB13 would be an athlete competing in a breaststroke event with the least severe visual impairment eligible for the Paralympic Games.
That's right. And on the flip side, team sports such as wheelchair basketball and wheelchair rugby are organized around a point system in which a maximum sum is recognized, and each player, depending on the nature of their disability, is designated a certain point value. A higher point value translates to higher functionality.
Exactly. And so for wheelchair basketball, 5 players are allowed on the court, each given a point value ranging from 1 to 4.5. The coach and team then must decide which players to place on the court during a game, but can never exceed a total point value of 14. In wheelchair rugby, however, 4 players are allowed on the court at one time, but the point system is much less, ranging from 0.5 to 3.5, and can never exceed a total of 8 points. This system ultimately furthers competition and strategy, as each team must decide on their own players which to play at a certain time, thus making the Paralympic Games that much more inclusive and engaging to keep up with.
Finishing up with possibly the most complex sports category of all, athletics. These sports are broken into 2 groups, T representing track and F representing field events. Between the two, there are over 50 distinct classes and 3 separate disciplines, being racing events with or without a wheelchair, jumping events, and standing throw events, and seated throw events.
Exactly, man. Para-athletics encompasses a huge range of athletes. Let's take a look at some of these charts and break them down even more. First, we have track events covering running and jumping, ranging from the T11 to T13 events for those with visual impairments, and T20 for those with intellectual disabilities, all the way to the T42 to T44 classes, covering athletes with lower limb deficiencies competing without prosthetics, compared to the T61 to T64 class, covering athletes with lower limb deficiencies competing with prosthetics. And now moving on into the wheelchair racing events, we have a range of classes as well. First, we have the T32 to T34 class, covering athletes with coordination impairments and usually seen athletes with cerebral palsy. The other classes in this are the T51 to T54, covering athletes with limb deficiencies, leg length differences, impaired muscle power, and athletes with spinal cord injuries are usually competing in these as well.
And now moving into the field aspect of para-athletics. There are the standing throw and seating throw athletic events with even more distinct classes. First, within the standing throw events, we have the F11 through F13 class for those with visual impairments, the F20 class for those with intellectual disabilities, all the way to F40 through F41 for athletes with short stature, and F45, F46 for those with upper limb deficiencies. Within the seated throwing events, there are also a range of classes found within the Paralympic Games. First, we have the F31-34 class for athletes with coordination impairment. And second, we have F51 through 57 class for athletes with limb deficiencies, leg length differences, impaired muscle power, or impaired range of motion.
Yeah, and while I know we've only touched the surface on such a complex classification system within the Paralympic Games, it's very important to fully understand the differences in order to fully appreciate the incredible athletes found within each event. You can find more information regarding Paralympic classifications on the Paralympic website and all across the web.
Thank you for joining us today. While classifications are a messy and complex business, learning about them helps us to recognize the amazing athleticism that Paralympics have to offer. Tune back in next time for more parasports. Until then, my name is Austin.
And I'm Joe, and we'll see you back here on the ASPN. Thank you.